Hello there and welcome to my paint guide for Marvel Crisis Protocol's Bishop and Nightcrawler. As you can see, I've started by spraying both these models with some matte black spray from Colourforge. I'm going to kick things off with Nightcrawler, and the first thing I'm going to do is highlight all his black with some Corvus black. This is then going to be followed up by a 50-50 mix of Corvus black and Cantor blue. The reason why I'm trying to do this is to get that sort of slight comic book look, because obviously in comic books blacks are never quite black. They've always got like a slight tinge of blue, and that's what we're aiming for here. Then for the final highlight, we're just going to use Cantor blue just by itself to do the absolute edges and the points where the light would catch. Now the black is out of the way, we're going to use some Mephiston red to start painting the rest of his outfit. And this will be followed by a wash with Carroburg crimson. While that wash dries, I'm going to use some Macragge blue to start painting the blue areas of Bishop. This will then be followed up by its own wash with some Drakenhof Nightshade. Once the washes are dry, we're going to move back to Nightcrawler and we're going to relayer that Mephiston red. Then we're going to use a 50-50 split of Mephiston red and Evil Sunz Scarlet for the first highlight. Followed by Evil Sunz Scarlet just by itself. For Bishop, we're going to relayer his clothing with some Macragge blue. This will be followed by a 50-50 mix of Calgar blue and Macragge blue. And then finally Calgar blue just by itself. I'll then use some Avalanche Sunset to start painting in the yellow detail on Bishop. That's the buckles and the big stripe that goes down and his holsters. It will of course need a couple of coats because I'm painting onto black, but once it's done I then gave it a wash with some Cassandra yellow. Once that dried, I hopped back over to Nightcrawler and used some grey cere to start painting in the white details. Much like the yellow on Bishop, I needed a couple of coats, but once that was done, I mixed in some matte white to the grey cere for a 50-50 ratio to start the first highlight. And this was followed by matte white for the second and final. Painting Nightcrawler's white gave plenty of time for the wash on Bishop to dry, so then I mixed a 50-50 mix of Avalanche Sunset and Flashgit's yellow for the first highlight. After that, it's just Flashgit's yellow by itself for the final highlight. Bishop also has some red on him. His X-Men symbols and his neckerchief are both red, so we're going to paint that with Mephiston red. These areas will then get washed with some Carroburg crimson. While that wash dries, we'll start on Nightcrawler's skin, and the base coat is going to be some Allatolic blue. This will then get washed with some Drakenhof Nightshade. Once the wash on Bishop is dry, we're going to do a 50-50 mix of Mephiston red and Evil Sunz Scarlet, which will then be followed by the final highlight of Evil Sunz Scarlet. I'm then going to use Catachan Flesh to paint the skin of Bishop, which will be given a coat of Reichland Flesh Shade. Before I paint the rest of the skin on Nightcrawler, I'm going to paint his eyes, and I'm going to do that by starting with some Abaddon Black in the slits where his eyes would be. And then I'm very carefully going to use some Avalanche Sunset to paint in his eyes. I'm then going to go back to Allatolic Blue to layer in the first highlight. This will then be followed by a 50-50 mix of Allatolic Blue and Hearth Blue. And then finally Hearth Blue will be used just by itself for the final highlight. For Bishop's skin, I'm going to do a 50-50 mix of Catachan Flesh and Bloodwreather Flesh. Then Blood Reaver Flesh just by itself. And then finally a 50-50 mix of Blood Reaver Flesh and Night Quester Flesh. I'm then going to neaten up his and Nightcrawler's hair with some Abaddon Black. I'm also going to neaten up his beard and those weapons. Of course, he also has the M on his face, so I'm going to paint that in now with some Abaddon Black as well. I'm then going to use some matte white to mark in his eyes. And then I'm going to start highlighting all the black with some Corvus Black. And then finally some Eshin Grey. For the ring around the X-Men logo and the X itself, I'm going to use some Mechanicus Standard Grey to paint that in. And this will be given a highlight of a 50-50 mix of Mechanicus Standard Grey and Dawnstone. For both Bishop's and Nightcrawler's powers, they're both kind of a pinky colour, so we're going to use Screamer Pink for a base coat. And then all these areas will be then washed with some Druchii Violet. Once that wash has dried, we're going to relayer the Screamer Pink on both Bishop and Nightcrawler. With Nightcrawler though, we're going to do the main central plume and the underside of the little clouds. After that, we'll do a 50-50 mix of Screamer Pink and Pink Horror. Once again, with Nightcrawler, we're going to concentrate on the lower parts of the clouds and just the lower part of the central plume. Next, it'll just be Pink Horror all by itself for the next highlight for Bishop. Then a 50-50 mix of Pink Horror and Emperor's Children. And then finally we'll do a 50-50 mix of Emperor's Children and Filgrim Pink just for the very tips and peaks of all that sort of power. Then to make the tops of Nightcrawler's bamps look a little bit darker, we're going to dry brush some Corvus Black on the top there. Try to avoid going into any recesses if you can. I'm then going to use Iron Hand Steel to paint the metal parts of the Sentinel arm that Bishop is standing on. I'm also going to paint the manhole and the drain on Bishop's base as well. I'm then going to do a 50-50 mix of Xerxes Purple with some Iron Hand Steel to get a little metallic look to paint parts of the Sentinel arm. And then for the rest, I'm going to do a 50-50 mix of Iron Hand Steel and Cantor Blue. I'm then going to use Dawnstone to paint all of the concrete, which will then get edge highlighted with some grey sear. The rims will then get tidied up with some Abaddon Black. I'm then going to use some watered down Agrax Earthshade all over the bases, except the Sentinel arm that Bishop is standing on. For the Sentinel arm, I'm going to use some Drakenhof Nightshade for the blue sections, and then Druchii Violet for the purple. And with that, that's both models finished. I've got to say, once again, Atomic Mass Games knock it out of the park with these models. An absolute joy to paint. Really nice and easy. Don't take too long at all, and I hope you have as much fun painting them as I did. All in all, it took about 5 hours to complete both models, and they are an excellent addition to your X-Men for Marvel Crisis Protocol. If you made it this far into the video, I really appreciate it. I hope it helped again, and if you want to see more, give us a thumbs up and a subscribe, and I will see you next time. Goodbye for now.